an integrated book of extremes, contrasts, darkness, light, justice, injustice, fulfillment and futility, and the unpredictability of life in general. Chapter 3 is possibly one of those more well-known sections as it talks about there being a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. I think probably immortalized in the 60s by the Birds song. There is a season for everything. Some people have been... the second thing I want to say is that some people have been rather dismissive dismissive of the book as a whole, as being a rather cynical view of life. Last year I was on holiday, went up to the Isle of Arran and met up with someone from where I grew up, a place called Stockport. It's where the glass is perpetually half empty, or it seems to be. My friend says something quite interesting. He says, I'm not a cynical person. I'm just realistic about life. Which is actually a perfect way to approach the book of Ecclesiastes, as it presents to us the very nature of life as it is under the sun. I think many of us, and in our thinking, we have what I would describe as an idealistic view of life. Life how we would like it to be. Measurable, predictable, a life where the sun always shines, and where we can eat what we want and still retain our figures. But although that may be our idealized life, we know full well that our actual experience is not like that. Your life is unpredictable. Like Forrest Gump's box of chocolates, you actually never know what you're going to get. There is joy mixed with sorrow. There is expectation and anticipation coupled with disappointment. As Derek Kidner points out in his commentary on Ecclesiastes, he says, time and chance can overtake the finest of our plans. We may like to have all our ducks lined up in a row, but life is unpredictable, isn't it? Talking on the book of Ecclesiastes, a Scottish minister called David Gibson said this: as Christians and as a church, we spend much of our time in the epistles, Ephesians and Hebrews, etc. But our lives are actually lived out in Ecclesiastes. It's a very real book. It's how life really is. And the third thing I want us to think about is that term, meaningless. Is life really meaningless? As when we actually kind of read these words, we automatically think, well, maybe it is. That's a rather cynical view. But the thing is, it's possibly one of the most unfortunate translations of a Hebrew word, in as much as its capacity to shape how we perceive the book as a whole. The word translated meaningless throughout the book is actually the Hebrew word called chevel, which literally means vapor or smoke. It's probably not the sort of question to ask in someone like this, but I don't know if you've ever had the experience or had a friend who've had the experience, either vaping or smoking, of actually kind of making smoke rings. And they seem actually kind of quite real as the smoke ring kind of goes up. And you can actually, I remember it when I was kind of growing up in the kind of 80s, and I had quite a number of friends that smoked, often doing smoke rings as a bit of a party trick, and you could actually put your finger through it. It seemed real, it seemed tangible, but it was there 1 minute, and it was gone the next, without a trace. That's Havel, a vapor. It doesn't last. Or as Proverbs 31:30 puts it, charm is deceptive, and beauty is Havel. Beauty is fleeting. It's there 1 moment, and it's gone the next. I think it was Joan Collins that said beauty is like being born rich and constantly getting poorer. In other words, everything that we see and experience now in life, it's not that it's meaningless, because life is full of meaning. God created a universe that was deeply meaningful. But what the teacher is saying is that everything that looks solid and firm and permanent now in our lives, it's Havel. It's elusive by nature, like smoke, a breath. It's fleeting. In other words, because life is Havel, life is fleeting. What the book of Ecclesiastes is wanting to communicate is live your life well. Live your life wisely before the one who is eternal. And I haven't even touched on the actual text yet, but we're going to try and look at we're going to kind of look at Ecclesiastes chapter 11. So if you've got your Bibles, please turn to it. So we're looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 11, starting at verse 7 and going on to 12:8. So it says, light is sweet, and it pleases the eye to see the sun. However many years man may live, let him enjoy them all. But let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. Everything to come is meaningless or Havel. Be happy, young man, while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see. But know that for all these things God will bring you to judgment. So then banish anxiety from your heart and cast off the troubles of your body, for youth and vigor are Havel. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keeper of the house trembles and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few and those looking through the window grow dim, when the doors of the streets are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when men rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint, when men are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and the desire no longer is stirred, then man goes to his eternal home and mourns. And mourners go about the streets. Remember him before the silver cord is severed, or the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring, or the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says a teacher. Everything is meaningless. Ecclesiastes 11:7-10 is kind of the prologue of the poem that we actually read in 12:1-8. And this is often the case in Scripture. Light is contrasted with darkness. It says light is sweet. To see the sun is pleasing. You know, there is a vigor and an aliveness in his words. You know, the start of verse 8 again is very upbeat. However many years a person may live, enjoy them all, he says. You know, it verges on being an imperative. You know, life is to be enjoyed. In other words, all that God has created was created for enjoyment. There is a real liberation in these words. Enjoy life. It's as if the teacher is giving us as permission. And again in verse 9, you who are young, be happy, and let your hearts give you joy in the days of your youth. Now, George Bernard Shaw once wrote, youth is the most precious thing in life. It's too bad it's wasted on young folk. And Ecclesiastes comes back and says, no, it's not wasted on the youth, because this is how the young person is meant to be, full of joyful optimism about life. You know, I think it's a tragedy that we see such poor mental health and anxiety among young people today. Often having to deal with the external pressures imposed on them by our culture, forced to kind of grow up prematurely, having to deal with things that they shouldn't really have to deal with in such a toxic culture. And so the teacher says to the young, you know, banish anxiety from your hearts and cast off the troubles of your body while you are young. As he goes to say, for youth and vigor are chevel. Youth and vigor are fleeting. He says, live your life well now and enjoy the gift of youth. And here is the important thing that the teacher wants to get across. But remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. So what's the teacher talking about here? Is he talking about difficult times ahead? Probably. You know, like the wise man who builds his house on the rock, storms will come. Is he talking about the grave? Most definitely. But why pour cold water on the joy of verse 7? Near the start of verse 8. Why pour water on it? Well, the answer is again presented in the same verse. You know, however many years a person may live, let him enjoy them all, but remember the days of darkness. For they will be many, and they will come. Yeah, because everything to come is chevel. It's like smoke. It's like a vapor. In other words, it's an invitation to embrace the gift of life, but always keeping in mind the temporal nature of it. You know, just as a footnote, if we read the end of verse 9, where it says God's judgment is God's judgment is mentioned, but it's important to kind of recognize that most commentators suggest that this part on judgment has been put there by some zealous scribe. And to be honest, it's actually quite unnecessary. See, throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, there is an assumption that we live our lives before our Creator. And one day, each of us will have to give an account. And so the youth is not being invited to a reckless life, but a joyous one. And I love the way Derek Kidner phrases this when he writes, joy was created to dance with goodness, not alone. Let me say that again. Joy was created to dance with goodness, not alone. And so it is with these verses. It invites us for joy to dance with goodness as the teacher exhorts the youth to remember their Creator. It says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come. Here's something to parents. I don't know if you're into word art at all, but if you're not, and if your kids are at that age where they still let you do things that, you're able to do, how about a bit of word art on the bedroom of the wall of your children? Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble, well, not the days of trouble come, but remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Waking up every morning to this on the wall, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. To the youth, or even to the young at heart, when life is carefree, full of joy and anticipation. Write this down somewhere, or just to ingrain it in the mind. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, and let joy dance with goodness and not alone. Because when joy dances alone, it can ruin a life. And it's a call by the teacher to be wise, isn't it? It's a call by the teacher to live a wise and full life, personified in the life lived out for Christ. We're actually going to start, I know the time has pretty much gone, but we're going to start our descent. And it's actually entering into the actual poem. We're going to start looking at this, and it's a descent for where you may experience, if it was a flight, you may experience a little bit of turbulence. And if you are the other end of the spectrum to youth, things may resonate kind of quite profoundly. If you are younger, the temptation may be to maybe switch off and think this poem really is largely irrelevant for me. But ironically, it was written with the young person in mind. So please don't switch off if you're of a younger generation or a younger kind of disposition or whatever, because it is here and here alone where we learn how to truly live as life actually is. It says, remember the Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Here the actual poetry describes where the enthusiasm of youth has disappeared, where life, or what remains of it, no longer chimes as it once did. We get to verse 2 of chapter 12 and reflects this as life is portrayed by the light of the sun and the moon, and the stars now start to grow dim, start to grow dark. You've heard that every cloud has a silver lining. Well, in these verses, there the clouds return after the rain. Where the sun was once anticipated, In the falling of life's curtain, the sun no longer comes out. And of course, there is the physical frailty of old age, isn't there? Where once the body stood tall and firm, and now it stoops and it trembles. We look to see that in verse 3. And where eyesight and hearing appreciated life's beauty and colourful array. And here it is described as a person peering through the window dimly. And the beautiful tunes of the songbirds now grow ever fainter. And of course, there are the grinders, describing the teeth as one by one they disappear from your mouth. I remember we used to go to Scotland for our holidays as a young person, and I kind of drew the short straw, I think, and ended up in the same room as my dear Aunt Agnes. And at night, and I didn't have to listen very carefully, and all I could hear was the sucking of her gums. Trying to sleep with that background noise was a little bit disturbing, to say the least. I'm not quite sure it'd be allowed these days, to be honest, but there we go. And of course, as well as there being a physical decline, so the confidence that you once knew as a young person is no more. Verse 5, no longer resilient, but distressed. That sense of vulnerability where you feel safer behind locked doors than you do in the street. And where desires were stirred, they are stirred no longer. And it goes on to say, then man goes to his eternal home, and mourners go about the streets. It's both somber and it's a sobering poem. Beautifully accurate, describing a person's inevitable demise, and no apology is made and no apology is given, just an invite repeated. Remember him. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is cut, before the golden bowl that contains the lights of your life is shattered to pieces, and the images of broken objects no longer fit for purpose, all portraying the finality of death, continues until it reaches the final bookend, as Ecclesiastes begins as it so ends, with meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Havel, like a vapor. Everything is like a vapor. And so the teacher says to you, and he says to me, let the end of life teach you how to live in the present. Enjoy the gift of life in all its fullness. Let your joy not dance alone, but let your joy dance with goodness. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Remember him, because life is Hevel. And really, it's a book and it's a call to faith, to remember your Creator. Jesus says, I have come to give you life, and I've come to give it in all its fullness. I want you, in your joy, to dance with goodness. And listen to these words, and I'm going to kind of finish with this. John 11:25 says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And that is life in all its fullness. So no matter where we are in life, whether at one end of the spectrum or the other, whether we're young at heart or a lot of this resonates with us, the invite is there. Remember your Creator. Let joy dance with goodness. throughout your life.